Welcome to Because You Need to Know, recorded live at the Cohen Multimedia Studio at Chautauqua Institution. I am Edwin K. Morse, President and Founder of Pioneer Knowledge Services. This series is your digital resource of valuable conversations with nonprofit and knowledge management enthusiasts from across industries and from around the globe. Today with us, we have Matthew Viel. He is the Deputy of the Knowledge Management Office and Knowledge Management Officer at U.S. Army Pacific. Matthew has over 20 years of transformational leadership, team building, and innovation within the U.S. Department of Defense, mainly focused within the information technology and network operations communities. Matthew has well-rounded proficiencies and knowledge of all disciplines and information management areas, such as network operations, enterprise architecture, enterprise services, customer service, and information assurance. How many years have you been doing KM?
I've been doing KM since about 2003, 2004, Edwin.
Was it actually called KM when you started?
So it wasn't. So I was kind of put in the Army Signal Corps. I had kind of get put into this Network Operations Security Center as they were kind of coming about. And what I noticed, the more I looked outwards towards the rest of the organization, internal to my own, really we weren't very good at certain things. And some of those bedrock things that we look at within knowledge management and we kind of get tied into almost intrinsically, like data management, information management, we just weren't very good. And so what I wanted to do, which is what I've always kind of wanted to do, is find a way to work smarter and not harder. And so I got put into a position when I came off active duty in that same organization, the same small unit within my unit that was called Information Dissemination Management, which was kind of the first kind of parlay into knowledge management. And a lot of us didn't understand. And we got put in a position where we were trying to explain what this new thing was. And a lot of us just converged on the idea that, hey, this is knowledge management. As we kind of looked out, this is knowledge management. And what we did is we kind of formed a coalition of the willing within the larger organization, essentially rewrote our own position descriptions in knowledge management. And kind of around that same time, we got pulled into the technology side of knowledge management and knowledge systems. And so that was an interesting thing. And I can tell you more kind of where that went and kind of where we're still kind of tied to that.
Okay. And do you, from that early stages, it sounds like there was a lot more towards technology and process more so than people. Would that be a fair judgment?
It certainly was. Part of that was, the U.S. Army Department of Defense are constantly seeking for that tech, and it's not just them. Big companies do the same thing. Small companies do the same thing. They want this piece of software in the information age that's going to solve all their problems of the organization. And in some of that was that I was in U.S. Army Signal working in an IT service provider organization. And so it kind of was a little more amplified than you'd see in some of the other organizations. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, the other organizations were doing the same thing. They really wanted to try and find something that us knowledge management professionals did that had some sort of product to it that they could grasp. And so that kind of led to us kind of leading the charge with some of the knowledge systems. And one primary one that emerged at that time and is still really the primary, if not one of the only major knowledge systems was SharePoint, Microsoft SharePoint. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of one of those things that I don't think we've ever been able to kind of lose the the harness on that one, the yoke, but it provides value in a knowledge management world when you figure out it's not the tool, it's the people and the processes that can be improved using that tool.
Well, and that's a good point. It seems to be such a blanket. People just think SharePoint, or you hear enough about it industry wide. People, organizations are using Microsoft SharePoint as their primary enterprise level tool set, but it seems like some organizations thinks that that's just it. Oh, we've got SharePoint, we're doing knowledge management, but they've not really lifted up the hood to look underneath. What do we have to do for governance? What do we have to do with learning and training and setting expectations of behaviors? It's just that whole culture piece that really seems to be a challenge. How do you deal with that?
It is, and I'll tell you, it is culture. And that's why, and I've been saying a lot lately, actually, that's why when you look at kind of knowledge management, and it's certainly within the DoD and elsewhere in nonprofits and big corporations, you kind of see that holy trinity of people, processes, technology, or the Army kind of did that subtle change to tools a few years ago. But the people part has always kind of been a people/culture. And that's because it really is, culture has to change in order for you to really harness the power of knowledge management. It just does. It's kind of like any management science that we've seen over the last few decades now, probably 4 or 5 decades. It's even going back to Deming and the Deming cycle, plan, do, check, act. I mean, it's all about organizational improvement, organizational learning, information sharing. These things kind of, you can't separate. They don't want the intrinsic as much as they want, or the intangible as much as they want something they can hold, that calendar that you made. And oftentimes they won't deconstruct to say, hey, look how we improved the process. Look how the culture now is improving and learning around this thing that was built. And so knowledge management professionals are generally, particularly the seasoned ones, we like to tell that story of it. The magic was not in the system. The magic was in the people and the culture changing.
How much of that culture change can you tie to a tangible? Have you ever really looked at, like, let's say retention? How many people, since we've started doing this, retention has gone up, or are there any things that you look at that you can measure that make that story tell that much louder?
We have. I mean, certainly once you start maturing, and particularly once you start getting into the C-level, or in the DoD, the general officer, admiral level, it pushes you into kind of maturing your knowledge management program to where you are showing critical success factors, measures of performance, and these types of things that you can pre-map out. And I'll tell you, the APQC, I don't want to plug too many other people, but the APQC is pretty good at helping you kind of figure out some of those metrics that you can gather that truly do show, hey, this is where we're having an impact, both on culture, both on process, or on process as well. And then as well with the use of technology. A lot of times, as I saw the Army kind of pulling away from technology and really saying, hey, we're not SharePoint, we're not information management. Let's take that good old pyramid and tear it apart and say, this is over here and this is over here. We don't care about that. It's led to some discombobulation, I think, in what we're trying to do as knowledge managers, because ultimately I keep going back to one of the things that I would love to get out of the knowledge management program, or every knowledge management program that I've built or been part of. It's about digital proficiency. If we can be digitally proficient, then we really can converge, the culture can converge on some really cool things that improve our lives and our processes. And Army seems to always get away. The DoD always seems to get away with this. Well, in the industry, because people are trying to make profit, but they don't seem to realize that time is money. And the more efficient you can be with your time, the more effective and efficient use of the money that we pay towards our organizations.
Yeah, because that cost is already there. So the faster you can get to that proficiency in decision making and producing, everybody wins. So a lot of framework in knowledge management seems to be around pain points. Looking at friction, where economy of either workflow or technology can come in and help build a better wheel, a better process, a better flow of knowledge. A lot of what we've talked about has been kind of at the 60,000 foot level, right? Big organizations. But how would you advise like an individual in an organization that maybe is not doing knowledge management and maybe the leadership is not familiar with the term, but somebody's listening and said, I wish I could do something at least at my level. What would you advise them? How could you, is there a book you would send them to? Is there some advice you would give them? What would they do first? Something like that.
That's a great question. And I've always, even if you look at some of the subsets of knowledge management we get pulled into, like content management, things that kind of we've decided we need to manage this information or this content. They all kind of seem to have these three levels. There's an enterprise level. So you're talking big strategic ways to manage the macro. There's organizational, which is more kind of the smaller units of the larger beast, if you will. And then there's the personal piece, right? And that's hugely important. And that's the thing. Yes, knowledge management works a lot better when everyone's rowing in the same direction, but it certainly can work. There is a personal knowledge management. I think Stan Garfield was talking about it in one of your podcasts. Mm-hmm. If you learn how to learn in a more effective way, that's going to be huge for you. The challenge really for someone getting started on that level where they're starting a grassroots thing that starts with themselves is there is so much out there, even on the subject of knowledge management or, a lot of the offshoots of this science, which really, KM is kind of the military does it pretty well. At least the Army has this idea that knowledge management is the focus in the middle of the binoculars. It focuses on one hand the science and on the other hand the art of command. Even they're not even talking knowledge management at that point, although they finally have articulated that knowledge and information management coupled together is a huge part of command, and it's one of 4 tasks that a command does to get smart. But to go back to your original question, I mean, get out there like almost anything else you want to learn about, and hit Google or Bing or whichever search you prefer. And there's a lot out there. It's funny.
Where do you start? Right.
It's funny. So one of the things that I tried to create one of these a few years ago, and I bubbled it up onto Mill Suite, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the rest of the audience is, but essentially it was at a time when it emerged at a time when social media was not used. A lot of these tools were blocked from the military networks. Mm-hmm. And you had some very smart guys out of Miltech Solutions Program Executive Office. Yes. One of the program executive offices at the DC area come up with this social media tools inside of the firewall. That really did a lot for community of practices within not just knowledge management, but definitely knowledge management within the Department of Defense. And one of the things that I originally started as kind of a let's build this as a collaborative, as a collective, was this thing that was called How to Suck at Knowledge Management, which was kind of a ripoff of one I saw about information security, and but I thought it very poignant, and so I said, why not do one for knowledge management? Why not R&D it, as I always say, which a lot of knowledge management is. And R&D is not research and development; it's rip off and duplicate, because someone's done it before, and that's where you start getting into some real power with knowledge management. So that individual really, get out there, start thinking, how could we suck at this? Oh, well, we don't share. We do these manual processes that eat up time, and then go out and plug into to some forums to really get smart on it. And there, I'll tell you, LinkedIn forums are starting to get better and better. There's
Agreed.
a few specific knowledge management forums that are out in the world. You might even have one in your organization that you can just start talking about
That's a good idea.
Smarter at the way we do business.
Yeah, if they could look internally, to go back to that, how would you advise somebody if there's some internal mechanism that they already have that creates a community collaborative forum or something, that would at least be a good start. Yeah, absolutely. And the learning piece, I get you. That absolutely is a key ingredient to being a good KM person. Absolutely. So we're getting short on time. What I'm going to ask you to final out here is, what's your definition of knowledge management?
Well, so my definition of knowledge management, and it's interesting you asked that question, and I see that you've asked that question in most of yours, and that's great. It definitely has become a frustration in a lot of people in the KM community, because it seems like no matter how far we get, there's always usually some senior leaders saying, how do you define knowledge management? How do you manage knowledge, as if it's this inside joke that like they've got us now, it's, the Army has really matured this definition over the years. And I think the latest one that now they're trying to ratify across the Department of Defense, as if you can imagine, it's pretty difficult to get all the branches to agree on a single definition.
Sure.
But their definition is, and I'll read it for you, the process of enabling knowledge flow to enhance shared understanding, learning, and decision-making. Pretty solid, actually. It is. It's pretty solid. There's a lot in there. The learning's in there. Decision making, shared understanding is all about. Kind of goes back to one of those original maxims that usually there were the clever bumper stickers at the bottom of some of our PowerPoint briefings. Which was one learns, everybody knows. Brilliant. That's that. Really is at the heart of KM, isn't it? And I think the original definition that we were kicking around 15 years ago is probably not that bad, which was basically the process of getting the right information to the right people in the right format at the time of need to make effective decisions. And so you talk about information management and knowledge management pushed to separate, because information management is kind of menial. It's kind of menial task. Data management done by the data science guys. It's knowledge management is when an organization or individual, either someone who's elevated to a leadership role or just someone who gets it, that, hey, we need this information. We need to know this information. We don't know this information. Let's go out and find it, and then be smart enough to know there's certain things that you don't even know that because someone else in the organization knows. And then there's the we don't even know that we don't know this information, but we probably should. And so that's kind of for me. My definition seems to change as well every other week, because it depends. It's like giving a speech. you got to know your audience. You know, if it's higher ups, you gotta keep it concise and you got to get into it. If it's if it's an old buddy who you used to do cam with back in the day, you can get a little deeper. And so it's less important what the definition is, and it's more important that we understand what knowledge management is, and that's kind of subjective because everybody's thoughts on knowledge is different, and that's where it goes back to learning. If we can kind of consistently give tools and processes that help people learn, whether they're individuals, organizations, or an enterprise, we're doing effective knowledge management.
I hear you. That's music to my ears. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your sharing of your expertise and your time.
All right. Aloha.
Thank you. Recorded live at the Cohen Multimedia Studio at Chautauqua Institution, Because You Need to Know is designed to bring people's experience and their knowledge forward to be shared. I'm Edwin K. Morris, and I thank you for joining in to listen to another conversation brought to you as a public service of Pioneer Knowledge Services, a nonprofit tax-exempt organization with a charitable knowledge management purpose. Find us online at pioneer-ks.org and add your voice to the conversation on Facebook.